how does one go about developing a healthy relationship with their thoughts and producing helpful or facilitative self-talk?
Positive thoughts do feel kind of fluffy. And when you get to a higher and higher level in your career of competition or just pressure, I feel like those positive thoughts don't feel as helpful because you're in such a high stress situation. When you're younger, those positive thoughts maybe make more sense, but I feel like that doesn't feel as helpful when you're in a high pressure game situation where the game is on the line. It's then in those moments that you realize that the things that you say to yourself have to be a little bit more constructive and instructive. And when you use those constructive and instructive lines, you can feel yourself actually like doing the things that you want to be doing. So if I'm in a championship game, if I say something to myself like, next tackle, I'm gonna time better, you give yourself a little bit more instruction, it's gonna be a lot more effective instead of try harder next time. It's something that you need to start experimenting with and understanding what's gonna be most beneficial to you. My advice to young players or young athletes would to be just start recognizing your self-talk and recognizing if what you're saying is helpful or hurtful. If it's helpful, how can you keep replicating that? If it's hurtful, how can you put a pause to that and turn it to be more helpful? Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Ditto. I'm Ashley Hatch here with my co-host, Dr. Matt Moore. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. All I gotta say, Ash, is I did it.
What did you do?
I finally did it. So I climbed a mountain today in the state of Utah.
Nice.
One of the highest. I don't think it's the highest. It's like the second or third highest. It's called Mount Timpanogos.
Nice.
For those people that are familiar with the state of Utah, you'll know that mountain. It was really hard, and I think it'll be a great transition to kind of our book for today.
Yeah, for sure.
But my body is really tired.
Yeah.
Here I am complaining to a professional athlete about my body is tired.
No, Mount Timp is no joke. I've had some teammates that have
climb.
done it, and they said it's really hard. So
Yeah,
I applaud you.
It is a climb. There's one point where you have to crawl. You have to,
because it's so steep.
Not hands and knees, but your feet in your hands, and you have to climb up the mountain. Yeah, and and you're already dead at that point, and so it was good. We got up at 3 a.m. this morning, and
who's we? You and your family, your friends?
Me and my brother. So I have a twin brother. For those that don't know, he does look a lot like me. Mm-hmm. And then he brought his friend who talks way too much. Oh my gosh.
He's one of those guys.
You know those people that just ask very little of you, and then it's just this tangent, and then another tangent, and then another tangent. So the whole time you're just going, yeah, okay.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. Yeah, oh wow. And then what else? Oh wow, are you okay? Yeah. Yeah. He did that for 6.5 straight hours.
Wow.
Wonderful guy. But he talked a lot.
Nice.
So, other than that, it was a wonderful experience. How are you, Ash? How are things going?
Good. Just in the grind of season. We won our game this weekend. It was a huge win against Kansas City.
4-1?
Mm-hmm. We didn't just beat them. We whooped them.
You beat the living bleepity bleep.
Yeah, so that felt good. And now we're just prepping for our game in San Diego this weekend. So yeah, things are good.
And you're flying out here tomorrow?
On Friday.
Right? Friday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our game's on
How's
Sunday.
San Diego doing? Are they contending? All of them are, I guess.
Yeah, everyone is. They're not having as good of a season as I'm sure they would have hoped, but it's still plenty of time in the season for people to turn things around. So we're going to have to give them our best for sure.
What have you done recently that is not soccer related? That's been fun. I'm curious.
Well, lately I've been so tired after training.
Sleeping.
So I've been watching The Bachelor, catching up on The Bachelor.
Oh, nice. There's a new season of The Bachelor?
Well, I mean, it started like a while ago. I just haven't watched it because I've been busy, and then I've been so tired lately that like I've just been like reading and
Yeah.
like stretching in the front room while watching. I'm also sewing still, but like I'm working on a big project right now. I'm trying to make a dress, so
Ooh,
it's a lot of
yeah, that
steps,
would be hard.
and I'm giving myself a very long timeline to finish it, so I don't rush it. So
Yeah.
I'm slowly chipping away at that, and that's been fun. But sometimes
Yeah.
requires more energy than I'm ready to give it, depending on the day.
So when we're on
So
episode 345,
yeah,
you'll finally be done with the
hopefully I'll
dress.
be wearing my dress. Yeah.
Um, okay, with The Bachelor, who's The Bachelor right now? The one that you're watching?
Jen. It's like there's only
Oh,
like one or two.
Bachelorette.
Sorry, Bachelorette. Yes, Bachelorette.
Oh,
The
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bachelor, I
Okay.
think, starts in a couple of months.
Isn't it
They
start
already
in
announced him.
January, right? Is
Oh,
usually
maybe
The
it
Bachelor?
is January, but we already know who it is. So yeah, you're right. Maybe they're recording now,
Yeah.
and then
I feel like The
yeah,
Bachelor always comes out when there's not a whole lot going on, like dead of winter.
yeah,
And
that's
then
true.
Bachelorette is
You're right. In the summer.
kind of spring, summer. Anyways,
Yeah.
wholesome show
Yeah.
for sure.
It's great. A great distraction show.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah.
Awesome. Do you want me to transition my awesome example, transition to our topic for today?
Sure, go ahead.
As I pointed out, listeners, at the first of this conversation, I climbed a mountain today. It's 11,753 feet, so it's no joke. 7.25, 7.25 mile one way, so you got like 14 and a half miles round trip. I endured the process. What honestly though, and I just posted this on LinkedIn. And I know we talked about this last time with Diane and Ayad as well. You can do hard things. Cardio is not my thing. It never has been. I'm a bigger individual. I'm not big by any means, but I'm a bigger individual. And so running and that constant pounding on my body just doesn't feel good. And I don't think it ever will, no matter how much weight or whatever I become. Anyways, it was apparent to me during the hike, especially on the way down, you get to like 2 miles down and you think you're almost there, and then you're like, oh, we still have 4 miles left. And so it's this constant like, oh, another 2 miles, oh, another mile and a half, oh, another quarter mile. I used some of my own tricks as a mental performance coach today, and they talk about this in this book that we're going to be talking about today, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to mention what I did on my hike today, but I want to first kind of introduce the book and then give like your overall thoughts on the book as well. I'll give my overall thoughts, and then we maybe can break down some of the highlights, especially from a psychological standpoint, what we found as a result of reading this wonderful book. So what book are we talking about? That book is called Endure. And now I'm forgetting the subtitle. Do you have the subtitle in front of you?
Yes, it's right here.
Oh,
It's
there you go.
Endure,
Perfect.
Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Limits of Human Performance.
Yeah. Amazing book. Author is Alex Hutchinson. I think the revised version just came out a year-ish ago.
I think that's what I
know
have. Revised
Yeah.
and updated.
Yeah, I think it's like 2023, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe a 2022. It's not that old.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Ash, overall thoughts, just kind of from a 30,000 viewpoint, what'd you think of it?
I absolutely loved this book. Jeff got it for my birthday, I think a couple years ago. And I think that the author did a great job of telling stories with so much science and data and research
Totally.
integrated into it, but it wasn't bland, it wasn't boring. I think it's very applicable to like my line of work when it comes to just endurance athletes and endurance
Absolutely.
training.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is about, limits of the mind and the body. And there's a lot of controversy among like different scientists about like, is it your mind that fatigues first, or is it your body, or is it both? And it's just so many examples with endurance athletes and just real life people examples that I absolutely loved it. I think I've read it like twice already.
Oh, sweet.
And
Wow.
yeah, I give it a 10 out of 10.
Oh, sweet.
I
love
loved
that
it.
you love it so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I highly recommend this to anyone curious about human potential in general. If I had to rate it, you gave it a 10 out of 10. I think I would give it 8.5, maybe. Maybe 8.75 at the most in my mind.
Not a 9.
Here's
You
why.
won't round up to a 9.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to go in the 90 percentile, because then you're getting like A minus. Here's why.
Mr. Professor coming out.
I know. Here we go. Here's why it's like a B plus B for me. Like you said, I'll first start with the really good. I love the stories that he told. There were so many fascinating stories that he mentioned in the book. And then it was backed, especially from like a educational academic lens, backed by all of this evidence, this research. That was amazing. Super interesting. Here's where I got lost. And this is where my own biases kind of come in and my interests. It was a lot of physiology. For me, I felt like it was 80-20, 90-10 almost in terms of physiology versus psychology. I was hoping for a little more psychology and research that talked more about psychology. Now, he did talk about it, but for me, it was like the last 30 pages of the book, 20 pages of the book maybe. And then most of it was about this runner having to do this thing, and this runner doing this thing, and this runner doing that thing. So if you like running and you like physiology, in my humble opinion, and breaking these barriers of human performance, especially in the sport of running and track and field, you will love, love, love the book. I was slightly disappointed, 8.75. So it wasn't a lot, but it was just a little. Coming from an actual sports psychology lens, I wish there was just more of that within the book.
That's fair.
Obviously you disagree. You think that's fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair, especially coming from your perspective of your profession. I think with my profession, I like learning about those things as well. And I think that he does a decent amount of, I don't know, I guess we should just dive into it, because like the things that I pointed out were actually more psychology, I don't know, like psychological based, instead of, I'm getting all my ologies mixed up.
Psychologically?
Yeah. And what was the other one?
Physiologically,
yeah.
Yeah, or just physical. You can say physical.
Yeah, physical. Thank you for us non-academic people. But yeah, no, I think that's a fair assessment. I can understand why you would say that, and so I think your rating is fair. But as I was reading this book, there was a lot of things that I feel like that I highlighted, that like things that we have talked about before, and I thought it was really cool 100%. To see it from a different person and in a different lens and in a different context. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of the book as well. Even just some of the same, like exact same like words or examples of like on page 225, I underlined non-judgmental self-awareness when he's talking about marathon runners. And like he talks about for a marathon runner, like, so your body will start to feel tired or hot, or you'll have shortness of breath or whatever it is, or like cramps or whatever, and that's like sending signals to your mind, right? But he talks about this in the perspective of a marathon runner, and how they have to have non-judgmental self-awareness to not panic when they are receiving these like signals and these signs, and not to get like overly like worried about them. And he says that marathon runners need to learn to monitor how your body actually feels and suspend judgment about it. And so I feel like it's so fascinating when you look at endurance athletes and how interconnected the physical and the mental are. And it's like, are those physical signs like actually happening? Is it because your body's actually physically tired, or are you reaching new limits that your mind is telling you that you've never reached before, and so it's saying, okay, it's time to like shut down? And like, how are you able to push past those limits? Because we know that we can, and there's a lot of studies that he shares in here that show that, like, whether it's motivation or whether it's a placebo effect, or there's other things that we can do to help increase our performance. And a lot of times those things are, I don't want to say like tricking our mind, but I guess distracting
Yeah, sure.
our mind from what we're actually feeling. And so I know for me, I've had many instances in my career, whether it's like fitness tests or a 90-minute game, where like sometimes I'm good at this and sometimes I'm not great at it, and I can feel it affect my performance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So many good things in there. It's one of the highlights for me in terms of, why I rated it the way I did and why I did very much enjoy the book. He highlights the crucial role of the brain, the mind, and it determining physical limits. And so the mind as this limiter of endurance. And for me, what really stood out were three things in terms of the mind: motivation, perception of effort, and self-talk. Those three significantly impacting an athlete's ability to be able to endure pain and push beyond these perceived boundaries. Some of them are actually happening to the physical body, but some of them are perceived. And being able to push past those limits has been, at least in many of the stories that he shared, significantly impactful in a very positive light for many of these athletes. For me, what you were mentioning and alluding to also is this beautiful word of acceptance. It's really hard to judge ourselves, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's spiritual, emotional, etc. And especially as an athlete, it's really hard to judge when you're running a 26.2 mile marathon, to judge how you're feeling and to be judgmental about those feelings, or to be judgmental about the physical limitations or perceived limitations that are happening. But if we can get to the point of acceptance and just seeing it for what it is, then we're shifting the perception. And in theory, promoting more of this facilitative experience. That for me is kind of what you were alluding to, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
The one huge thing, and I'm going to share a study that he shared in his book that really stood out to me from Endure in terms of psychological tenets, skill set, strategies, etc., is self-talk. Basically, what you say to yourself has a great impact on how you perform. And in fact, here's a direct quote from the book. I don't have the page number, but it's coming straight from this book, straight from Alex's. Well, it might not be Alex, actually, because he's alluding to a study here. Anyways, this is what he said in the book. Just like a smile or frown, the words in your head have the power to influence the very feelings they're supposed to reflect.
Page 66.
66. Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, I had that underlined too.
Then he talks about this amazing study about how cyclists who implemented positive self-talk and how this self-talk group for these cyclists lasted about 18% longer than the control group, and their rating of perceived exertion, there we see that perception again, climbed more slowly throughout the test. The study, if you're wondering what it is, it's titled "Talking Yourself Out of Exhaustion: The Effects of Self-Talk on Endurance Performance." Fascinating, right? 18% is pretty significant.
Yeah.
Now, here's something I want to touch on, especially from kind of an academic lens. We hear these terms, positive self-talk and negative self-talk, all the time. And yes, I think those are the quote-unquote correct terms coming from a lot of different studies and a lot of different literature avenues, if you will. I don't love those terms, positive and negative. It paints too much of a black and white picture for me. There's a lot more gray area as it pertains to self-talk. And so usually when I work with athletes, I phrase it either helpful or hurtful self-talk. Because if you think about it, what can be perceived, quote unquote, positive for one person could be negative for another person, and vice versa. One example of this that I use all the time is how motivation, or how athletes use trash talk as motivation. Have you ever done that? Have you ever, whether it's external or internal, like trash talk? So it's objectively negative, but you're utilizing it in a facilitative way.
Yeah, for sure. I think maybe not the same type of trash talk as other people, but I mean, I think it's similar to when maybe a coach says something that you don't like or says you're not good enough, or like we talked about last episode, and using that in a positive way to kind of like motivate you to prove someone wrong.
In a helpful way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Great example. Another example, I remember using this with soldiers when I was working with the U.S. Army. It probably isn't the most helpful to think about chocolate chip cookies when you're performing an obstacle course and you're having to test in front of your drill sergeants. Yeah. It's a positive thought. Chocolate chip cookies objectively are very wonderful, but it might not be the most helpful. And then so the idea is subjectively choosing the most helpful thoughts in the context of the right situations is going to, in my opinion, produce the best outcome. And Alex alludes to influence directly these feelings that they're supposed to reflect, which is then going to produce this behavioral component, these actions.
Yeah.
So from the literature, instead of using positive, negative, for me, again, helpful versus hurtful, there are essentially two different forms of self-talk. One is what's called motivational self-talk, and one which is called instructional self-talk. So motivational is, I can do this, you got this, let's go, those type of phrases. You're motivating internally yourself to get through or to perform at a high level. Instructional self-talk is wrist in, or elbow flexion, or plant foot as I go to kick my PK. You're using instructional cues internally to help you perform better. Those essentially are two different forms of self-talk. And then you can throw in this helpful, hurtful type of protocols in terms of it being the most facilitative, or hopefully being the most facilitative for you as the performer. Now, here's what I did today. I told you I was going to share what I did today. I wanted to, because I knew we were going to have this conversation today, and specifically about self-talk. And so I wanted to put it into play. I wanted to see how it was going to help me. Again, I'm not a runner. I don't love to run. Don't love more than usually 3 miles. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I think that's enough for me. But this was over 14 miles. And so I'm coming down on this trail. I'm at like mile 12. So I got like 2.5 miles left. And I wanted to like get down. I was kind of sick of being on the trail at that point.
Yeah.
And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go for a little jog down the trail, down the mountain. But it, of course, hurt. My knees were hurting, hips were hurting, ankles were hurting, muscles, etc. What I did, self-talk wise, helpful wise, motivation wise, is I used this phrase called through the pain. I've done this before. I know I've talked about this with some athletes before, because I could feel it on every little jog, on every little step. My muscles were aching and joints were hurting. But in my mind, I kept repeating, and I did it out loud as well on some instances, through the pain, through the pain, through the pain, through the pain. And it was very facilitative. I was able to jog pretty much those last 2.5 miles, and I got down much faster than I thought I could. And I know it was because I was utilizing the power of the mind, because what we say to ourselves has enormous influence, because we're going to believe it, or we're not going to believe it. You have that power to believe in what you're saying or not to believe in what you're saying. And so here's my challenge for everybody, in whatever domain you might find yourself in. utilize this power, this influence of your internal dialogue, and start to change what you're saying to yourself in a helpful way. Because I know there's been studies done on this as well. Generally speaking, what we say to ourselves is very negative or very hurtful. As much as 90 to 95% has been analyzed with some of these studies, has shown that what we say to ourselves is hurtful, which just sucks. Like we're doing ourselves such a disservice by talking crappy to ourselves. And so change that. Change it to just little tweaks to help it and to facilitate whatever domain that you might find yourself in.
Yeah.
With all that to say, Ash, especially in terms of self-talk in your experience, what have you done in your career, maybe in your life in general, as it pertains to self-talk? And how have you found, because I know we've discussed this over the years, how have you found self-talk specifically to be a helpful tool for you psychologically?
I mean, I feel like self-talk is everything because I feel like the way that you're talking to yourself shows in your body language and in your performance. And it's very obvious when you're watching an athlete and they make a mistake, what they are saying to themselves after that mistake has been made. And I've been on both sides of it. I've had good self-talk where actually I have a story that I feel like will help articulate this well. On the positive side, I was probably like 10 or 11 years old playing in at a UCLA Bruins Cup club tournament. It was 7v7.
Cool.
And it was really fun, and my team was doing really well. I was in the box defending a corner kick, and I accidentally scored on my own team. And I was so upset, but I was like determined to use that moment to like give myself momentum to help my team score a goal to get it back. And I did exactly that. Like I was able to just like let it go. I don't know why I was able to do this at such a young age, but I was able to let it go and like be like, okay, I'm going to go get it back from my team. And like literally maybe like 2 minutes later, I helped my team score like 2 goals and we ended up winning the game. And I had a really good discussion with my dad about it, and he was just like, I'm so proud of you for like not letting that moment ruin the rest of the game. But I've been on both ends of it, where I've had moments in the game where I've let myself talk because of a mistake prevent me from trying things again. And I think self-talk is just crucial, especially in a game like soccer, where it's a game of moments, and the team that has more positive or effective moments is most likely going to win the game. And it's such a mental battle because there's so much unpredictability. There's so many different factors. And if you aren't talking to yourself effectively in the game, you're most likely not going to be performing effectively. You're most likely not going to be talking to others effectively and constructively. So kind of your body language isn't going to be effective or helpful to yourself or those around you. So I think self-talk is huge when it comes to all those aspects. And when it's not good, it's really not good, and it doesn't help anyone else around you. So I would say, yeah, it's really important.
Yeah. I have a question to follow up on that, but really quickly, for those that might be of interest to this, self-talk is essentially stemming from this therapeutic lens of cognitive behavioral therapy. Basically, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, it focuses on the power of thought and how thought influences emotions and how emotions influence physical and or behavioral consequences, and vice versa as well. When we're moving, it's affecting how we feel, and then the thoughts. And so again, with CBT especially, the focus is on changing our relationship with thoughts. It has shown to be over the years very effective, very powerful. It is not the only therapeutic lens that can and should be implemented in a lot of especially sports psychology instances, but nonetheless it can and is very, very effective. And it focuses on this power of developing a healthy relationship with our thoughts and in our internal dialogue. Here's my follow-up question to you, or for you. young athletes, they're learning about self-talk. They understand that what they say to themselves is important. How would you, and now experiencing this power of self-talk and implementing it, I mean, you just said that self-talk is everything. How does one go about developing a healthy relationship with their thoughts and or producing helpful or facilitative self-talk? What did you do kind of explicitly and deliberately over the years to do that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I love how you shared positive and negative thoughts isn't usually the most helpful, because a lot of the times I feel like the positive thoughts do feel kind of like fluffy. And when you get to higher and higher levels in your career of competition or just pressure, I feel like those positive thoughts don't feel as helpful because you're in such a high stress situation, if that makes sense. So I feel like when you're younger, those quote unquote positive thoughts maybe make more sense, just because you're learning the difference between like what you're saying to yourself matters. And so using like, oh, positive, like, oh, I'm good, or I can do this. I guess those are like more like what you were saying, motivational self-talk. But I feel like that doesn't feel as helpful when you're in a high pressure game situation where the game is on the line, or you're down and you need to be able to dig deep, or you are feeling some sort of pain, but it's the type of pain that's okay to push through. But how do you dig deep and push through that pain? And I feel like it's then in those moments that you realize that the things that you say to yourself have to be a little bit more constructive and instructive. And when you use those constructive and instructive lines, you can feel yourself actually like doing the things that you want to be doing. So if I'm in a championship game and I'm like just like saying fluff positivity things like okay, like it's still going to be helpful, right? Like, okay, I can do this, or it's all right, next one. Those are still going to be helpful. But if I say something to myself like, okay, next one I'm going to keep on frame, or next tackle I'm going to time better, or next through ball I'm going to put more spin on it, or like you give yourself a little bit more instruction, is going to be a lot more effective instead of just like try harder next time. So I feel like it's something that you need to start, especially as a young athlete, experimenting with and understanding what's going to be most beneficial to you, and like what phrases are going to be most beneficial to you, because it's not the same for everyone. A good example in the book that you already talked about was that the cyclists who use positive self-talk and how they were able to go further. The example that he used in the book was the self-talk group learned to use certain phrases early on in their cycling workout of like, okay, feeling good. And then as they went on throughout their workout and things got harder, they said things like push through this. And so it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of like, it's okay to recognize that this is hard. And I think, or I'm feeling pain, or I haven't been able to do this before, or I made a mistake. You need to recognize those things in order to be able to push past them or to move on past them, whatever they may be. And so I feel like this is a good example, or the example that you used of hiking the mountain of like push through the pain, or what was it that you said?
Through the pain.
Through the pain. Yeah. It's accepting and understanding like where you're at, but then also accepting and acknowledging that you can go further, whatever that is. And so, yeah, for me, a lot of the times it's, if I make a mistake, it's like, okay, like, how am I going to get over this? I'm going to say, okay, next time I'm going to do this, or next, I'm just going to go for it again and I'm not going to give up, or it's, I'm getting better. Like, what's that saying? Pain is weakness leaving the body. My coaches used to say that all the time when I was younger, and I was like, that's so stupid. But I feel like it's one of those phrases that helps us when we say it. We understand that, okay, this may be hard, but I'm going to get better. And so for me, he also says in this book that he encouraged the bikers to practice using these phrases and figure out which ones felt most comfortable and most effective. And so I think that also just alludes to that. it's not going to be the same for everyone. Some people might say, I don't want to say feeling good at the beginning. I want to just say I'm feeling fine, or whatever. It is what it is. You know, that's one of our favorite sayings from that book, The Neutral Thinking. Who's that author?
Trevor Moawad.
Yeah. That's one of Jeff and I's like favorite quotes now, is just, it is what it is.
We'll have to talk about that book at a different time. Yeah.
So my advice to young players or young athletes would to be just start recognizing your self-talk and recognizing if what you're saying is helpful or hurtful. And if it's helpful, how can you keep replicating that? If it's hurtful, how can you put a pause to that and turn it to be more helpful?
Mm-hmm. God, I love all of that. Very similar, Ash, when I'm asked this question, especially by young athletes, like, okay, well, how can I develop helpful self-talk phrases, words, strategies, etc.? Almost everything you just said, if I had to simplify it and maybe add just a little bit more, I usually tell them, one, it needs to be authentic. It needs to come from you. Don't use your mom's phrasing or your dad or your coach. Or if they do say something that you really like and it feels authentic to say that, that's okay. Two, you need to believe it. So when you say, I got this, or push through the pain, do you believe really that you can push through the pain? Or do you believe really that you've got this? Because if you don't, you need to maybe get a different phrase and or prepare differently so that that phrase can have validity behind it. And then three, you just said it. Is it helpful? In those moments, whether it's training or competition or you're presenting in front of a group in business, is it going to help? Because if it is, perfect. I remember, again, working with some soldiers around these protocols. Authenticity, is it helpful? And then, do you believe it? And some of it was just pure vulgarity, strings of vulgarity and swear words with some other words mixed in. But it worked for them. And I asked them, is this authentic? Yeah. Do you believe it? Yeah. Is it helpful for these moments? Yeah. Okay, then do it.
Great, yeah.
And then you can experiment with it and come back and say, ooh, it was kind of helpful, but not really. Maybe I'll change it up X, Y, Z, or it really sucked. I need to change it up. That's the process, and it's a skill set. Talking to yourself is a skill set. Going back, trial and error, coming and reflecting, changing things up, going and experimenting, coming back, changing things up, etc. So for those that are interested, experiment with it. Challenge yourself to find those phrases or words. It can be just one word if you want, to start implementing into your own internal dialogue, because I promise it's going to be helpful. Yeah. I want to switch gears just a little. Before I do, is there anything else about self-talk in particular that you needed to punch in there?
No, I think we covered it really well.
Yeah, okay. I think we did too. I think that was wonderful. Here's my other thing that I just love from Endure by Alex Hutchinson in terms of especially the psychological component of his book. He explores how mental fatigue affects physical performance. So he explores like how stress and prolonged cognitive tasks, so he goes over a lot of different studies relating to this, how they can reduce physical performance. It's amazing, based off of this, how truly intimately connected the mind and body are. And how when we're exerting psychological energy, how that affects physical. I was just talking to my students about this the other day in my exercise psychology course. And we brought this up and I asked them, I'll give you an example of how you probably have experienced this. I said, how many of you have taken finals before? And almost all of them, except for maybe the freshmen, raised their hands. And I said, okay, after a week or maybe just 1 8-hour bout in the library of studying for your finals, you're sitting. How do you feel after you're done? And all of them said, oh my gosh, I'm so fatigued. I'm so exhausted. I just want to go home and sleep. It's like, even physically you feel that way? And they all said, yeah. And I know you can attest to this.
Yeah.
When we're doing mental fatigue protocols or we're experiencing cognitive stress, it's going to affect us physically. And so being aware of that, first and foremost, like you were mentioning, Ashley, and then implementing some strategies. And they talked about this in Endure, like mindfulness, like visualization, relaxation techniques, like breathing. It's going to help you as the athlete, you as the performer, manage this mental fatigue, which is then going to optimize physical performance because of how intimately connected the mind and body are. Anyways, I found that fascinating. I think there were some wonderful studies, wonderful examples that he shared in relation to that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, especially in terms of mindfulness, visualization, relaxation techniques, similar to self-talk, what role has those things played in your performance, in your career? And maybe even backing up further, what role has mental fatigue played in terms of it affecting your physical performance? All of that. There's a lot of questions in there. Hopefully you can remember.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions in there, but I also loved this part of the book, and I'm glad that you brought it up because there's also a part that I wanted to bring up of this perceived exertion, because it's something, what's it called? What's the name of the guy? The Borg scale? Is that the guy's name? So we input our RPEs after every training. So RPE is rate of perceived exertion. And we do it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being easy, 10 being like the absolute hardest. And the reason why we do it is so that our strength and sports science team, they can track how we perceived the session to be, and then also compare that with the numbers and see what we actually did. And they do it to plan our sessions, but from my perspective, I think it's really cool that they track our RPEs, because I feel like it's them acknowledging that how hard we think it was also comes into play compared to how hard it quote unquote actually was when it comes to like the numbers and the actual data. And so I think that just shows that like how we perceive things actually matters and does affect our physical fatigue. Anyway, I just thought that was a really cool insight to hear like where this measurement came from and like why we do it and like why it's important. And he also brings up in the book, which, sorry, I'm not answering all your questions that you asked, but he says if you could train the brain to become more accustomed to mental fatigue, then just like the body, it would adapt to the task of staying on pace and would feel easier. So like to kind of answer your question. That's
answering my question.
Yeah, to kind of answer your question, like, yes, training your brain to either like cope with or to manage the mental fatigue is important. And I think that's the things that I do to help do that are meditation, breathing, journaling. I use all of these different methods at different points in time, but I do think there's another level. There's managing, but then there's also conditioning and being able to just like increase that mental flexibility, that mental strength. And so I feel like there's a distinction between, same as the physical, right? I take ice baths and I do things to recover to help me manage the symptoms that I'm experiencing in that moment. But I'm also training really hard and running and doing all these things to build on the foundation of my, whether it's endurance or my strength. And I'm doing things to help myself become more physically superior than I was at the beginning of the season or in the middle. So I think there's a distinction between the two, but I do think it's very important to train the mind and also have these tools to help yourself mentally like cope with the stresses of everyday life or just sports in general or whatever it is. But as I was reading this too, I thought a lot about moms and how like we like joke about this thing called like mom strength. But it's like, I think it's a real thing, but I think it's because they don't have time to actually stop and think about how they actually feel. And when we sometimes have time to stop and think about how we actually feel, I feel like sometimes we're like, oh, I feel more tired than I thought I would, or whatever it is. But I feel like moms just, I know when I think about my mom, when she had 4 kids, all 2 years apart growing up, it was just go, 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 go. And there was no time to be like, how do I perceive, what's my rate of perceived exertion today? It's like, no, I just do it. And you keep doing it and you just get better. You create this like endurance, which I feel like turns into like superhuman mom strength. But anyway, I was thinking of moms too as I was reading this. But yeah, so those are kind of my roundabout answers for you. All in all, it's really important.
I love it. I love bringing in the mom example. Ultimately, Ash, at least how I am interpreting a lot of what you just said, things like mental fatigue and incorporating strategies like mindfulness, visualization, imagery, relaxation techniques, etc. You're wanting to get to a point, and I could argue this, you could argue this with physical performance as well, of self-regulation. And to do that, you need to prepare and train and practice and then repeat. So when, not if, mental fatigue and or physical fatigue occurs, you're self-regulated to be able to know, ooh, I need to incorporate breathing. Ooh, I need to incorporate maybe a 2-minute imagery session. Ooh, I need to incorporate meditation. I haven't done my meditation today. Or, ooh, I need to take my ice bath. Ooh, I need to do some deep stretching. That's regulating the process. But to be able to get there psychologically, especially, just like the physical, you need to practice. You need to be deliberate about it and consistent with it. So,
Yeah.
anyways, those are pretty much my thoughts on this really wonderful 8.75
10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
book. Anything else, Ashley, from your end in terms of bringing up some highlights from your experience in reading this book?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if we could probably talk about this book for like 10 hours straight, because there's just so much, and the things that we just talked about were like only a few things. But I think a good place to end is, you alluded to it earlier, you said it earlier, is this word belief. And at the end of the book, in like the last couple chapters, the author talks about the Kenyan runners. Do you remember this or no?
Yeah, I do.
And I read it again last night, and I was just like so inspired by it. But I feel like it's a good place to end, just because I feel like, I know I do this. A lot of us get stuck in like staying within these like confines or these boundaries or this pattern, and this is how we're supposed to do things. But if you look at the Kenyans and how they run as an example, it's quite inspiring, because he talks about how, I don't know if it was him or someone went to go run with these Kenyans and to understand why they're so good.
Else.
Yeah, someone else went to train with these Kenyans and to understand why they're so good at what they do. And essentially he said that everyone wakes up in the morning and just starts running with the fastest runners. And they just run for as fast and as long as they can. And when they can't run anymore, they just stop. And then they go home, rest, repeat, and do it again. And it's just so crazy, because if you think about it from, I'm sure like there's a lot of like running and conditioning coaches who probably just like are like, this is crazy, because a lot of runners have these specific times, these specific splits, and like they want to start the race off at this pace, and at this moment they want to do this. But he talks about how that if you start the race knowing how you want to finish it, then you don't leave any room for something amazing to happen. You don't leave any room for yourself to to surprise yourself. And I just thought it was so cool. It was just like such a outside of the box thinking. Let's see, I wrote down a quote. Okay, yeah, this is what he said. He said, referring to the Kenyan runner, he said he noticed he wakes up every morning with a firm conviction that today will finally be his or her day. They run with the leaders because they think they can beat them. And if the harsh reality proves that they can't, they regroup and they try again the next day. And that belief, fostered by a long-standing international dominance of generations of Kenyan runners, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I just thought that was really powerful. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's a really good way to live your life, is just to wake up and believe that every day that you can run with the best. And if you can't, that's okay. You try again tomorrow. But anyway, I feel like that's a really good way to live and a good lesson to learn by, because it's like, why not? Like, why not surprise yourself? Why not push yourself and see what your limits are? And I feel like a lot of us are too scared to like even come close to those limits. So that's my mic drop from the end of the book from Endure, but I really liked it.
It's, I think, a very common theme, you said it, firm conviction, aka a belief in yourself. A very common theme with Alex Honnold, with Diana Nyad, with these Kenyan runners. If you want to do something great, start to develop this conviction, firm conviction within yourself that you could get better, that you can accomplish these things. Boom.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. Go out and get the book. It's well worth the read. A lot of wonderful stories, a lot of awesome research that backs up all these stories as well. So, yeah. All right, Ash.
Awesome. I'll try and see if Jeff can put in the link in the notes somewhere. Okay. But anyway, hope everyone enjoyed. Beautiful. And enjoy the rest of your day and week.
Adios.